As educators, we talk a lot about classroom systems and procedures, but we don't always elaborate about what they are, how to begin teaching them, or how long you should spend teaching them. Today, I have the skinny on all my classroom systems and procedures and how I incorporate teaching them and training my students during the school day and over the first weeks of school.
I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5, and this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. All right, let's get down to it. I begin by creating a list of all the systems and procedures I need. To do this, I mentally walk through my school day, imagining how I want things to function at each section of the day. This helps with two things. It puts the systems in order that they occur first in the day and creates an ordered list for me to remind myself as we begin school as a class. It keeps things on track. So your list will begin with how students are to enter the classroom and put their things away. This includes not only where and how they are to physically do any of these things, but what their voice level will be as well. Start the way you want to go on and practice, practice, practice. The details do matter. If you allow your students to come in screaming and yelling or with very loud voices and that drives you nuts, it's going to drive you nuts all year if you don't set the precedent from the beginning on how you expect their voice level to be. Then what do they do next? How will they do that? You need to get your morning routines down first and foremost, because every day it's going to happen and your students will come in the first day and just get things put away and then you can train them. From that point on, you need them to practice those expectations every day. Now, I could go through every single one of my systems, and this would be a very long podcast if I did that. And the reality is, I get asked what's on my list all the time. So I'm just going to read my list to you. This way, you'll have it. And if you want to copy the list, it's in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. I will actually put a link to that in the show notes for you. Now, before I jump into the list, I want to tell you that some of these things have other details mixed in with them. So I might have entering the classroom, and then I would say how, putting your things away, and what to do next. So those might be my subcategories within the category. So I might not read all the subcategories. I will try. So without further ado, here's my list. Entering the classroom. Attendance and lunch. Morning meeting. Whole group expectations. Hallway expectations. Your daily schedule. Restrooms and water, how and when. Teacher signals for attention. This is a big one. You want to get it down quickly. Asking for help. Classroom and school rules. Behavior expectations, consequences, timeout, calm corner, do's and don'ts, whatever it is that you have. Lining up expectations. Emergency procedures. Yes, those are important, but I don't put them at the top of my list because until we learn how to line up properly and enter the classroom and all the basics, it's really hard to do emergency procedures effectively. One I have that a lot of people don't have is traffic patterns. We live in a crowded space, and so for me, having students know which way we're going, which door to enter, which door to exit, those kinds of things are important to me. You might not care, but for me, that's important. Movement around the classroom. How do you expect students to move around the classroom? When are they allowed to get up and go and do things? And when should they stay in their seat? Those are things that you need to address and discuss and have a plan for. Papers, turning in, handing out papers, procedures for that. Supplies, how, what, when, whether it's paper, sharpening pencils, or other supplies, you need to have a plan for all of those things. Your noise levels, you need to have a plan and train your students in what your expectation is for different times of the day and different work situations, what the noise level is going to be. Subject-based procedures. I have different procedures for different subjects. You might do a number routine with your math program. You might do a phonics routine with your language arts program. Maybe you have other kinds of routines that you do. So there's all kinds of procedures and routines that might be associated with a particular subject. Obviously, these come later in your training as opposed to early in your training. You're really going to work on some basics first, and then you start adding in some of these kind of specific things later on. You also need to address desk or table and supply expectations, so organization and use of all of those things, and, how are we going to manage our supplies, whether they're at a table situation or a desk situation, do they have cubbies, those kinds of things. Classroom zones. I have different zones in my classroom. They are all labeled, and so students know where everything goes and they know where everything has a home. Addressing what they are, when we use them, and how we use those particular zones is something I train students in. Desk and workspace roles. Organization, cleaning, working independently, working in pairs, working in groups, all of those kind of things with different workspaces are important. If you have flexible seating, this is the time to address that as well. I also address paper headings and quality expectations with my students. Do I do it the first day? Not really. Really, I start doing that in later days, but you do want to have a standard so that you can always find your student's name. Is the name going in the top left corner? Is it going in the top right corner? Is it going somewhere else? Is there always a line for a name somewhere on all of your papers? And if that's the case, then the students need to find that and put their name there. What are your quality expectations? You need to be very specific about what your expectation is and follow through with it. Transitions. Oh my gosh, some of the hardest things to do during the school year is get your students to transition well from one activity to the other. Whether you have class songs or chants or something else that you do during transitions that helps everything move smoothly and helps students mentally leave one subject behind to move on to the next. These are important times during your school day, and it sets each subject up for success or failure depending on how we handle them. Early finishers. What do you do when you're done? This is something else that we need to address fairly early on. If you don't have a plan for that, then you need to have a plan for that. I do have a place where students go to get something new to do if they finish early. I actually have a choice board for students to look at and choose what to do next. And going along with early finishers for me is a finish it folder. So when students don't finish their work and we're already moving on, they place the work in a finish it folder and it goes in, they have a seat pocket, it goes in the seat pocket behind their chair. Then whenever they have extra time or they finish early, their first line of defense is to go into that finish it folder and work on anything that has not been finished. I love it. It works absolutely phenomenally for me. You may have individual subject folders or binder sections for your students and they place their work in there. I like having all the unfinished work in one place because then it is a one-stop shop and students can always go in and not have to remember what they didn't finish. They'll find it right there. And then for us, we have a Friday fun time on Friday, and students get a chance to use different manipulatives and games and all kinds of things for a little while. And anyone who has not finished work, that's the time that they can finish up, and I have extra time to help if they need more assistance. As soon as they're done, they can go and do Friday fun. So it encourages students to work on those things that are not finished whenever they finish early or have some free time during the week. Students need to know when and how to interrupt you. What is your plan? Do you have a way for students to line up if they need help, or are they going to stand around your desk and wait in line, which drives me completely crazy? So there's lots of ways to handle this, and we'll talk about that in another podcast. But you need a plan for how students are going to interrupt you or not interrupt you when they need help. What's the plan? What are they going to do? You need playground rules and expectations, and that needs to happen the first day, but then reinforced throughout. And then you can add in other pieces. So you may have your rules and expectations that you talk about the first day as they go out to the playground, but you may start working on problem solving and how to get along in a whole other way the second week of school when the honeymoon has worn off. Your playground training also needs to include cleaning up and lining up. I think sometimes we forget this and then we get out there and think, oh shoot, we need to get everybody off the playground. Well, have a plan for that. Lunchroom expectations and procedures. Don't forget after lunch restart. When we come back into the classroom, you need to have a way for students to reset and restart so that you're not wasting time dealing with what happened at recess. Classroom jobs. You need training for that. And your classroom library. How are students going to shop for books? When are they going to shop for books? How do they choose books? How do you handle returns? What if a book needs some repairing? What are your systems and procedures for your classroom library? How will you keep your classroom library in shape? Do you have a checkout system or no checkout system? Do you have a way for students to return books? Do you have a way for all those return books to get back into your classroom library? What is your plan? And you want to make sure that you're not making more work for yourself and that you are actually having your students find ways that they can help with this as well. So classroom jobs around the classroom library is always a good idea. Technology. You need to have systems around technology. Technology is here to stay. It is going to be in your classroom whether you love it or hate it. I am frenemies with technology. Love it and hate it at the same time. It just depends on what we're talking about. But you need to have rules and expectations in place about how, when, and why. What's your plan if students are absent and tardy? How are they going to get caught up on work? How are you going to make sure that you don't forget what work that they missed? You need a plan for that. Homework expectations, you need to have those in place. I don't start homework until usually the second or third week of school. And I am very clear with parents from the beginning about that because we are getting so much down and in place in the classroom that we don't really start a whole lot of homework until a little bit later, simply because we have other things that we want to accomplish and students are getting back into school shape and they are exhausted. They need to rest so that they're ready for the next day. You need to clean up routines and dismissal routines as well. How are you going to do that? What's your expectations? And then there are the occasional items. Those are all of your regular things, but then there are things that are going to come up throughout the year that you need to have plans for as well. Things like indoor recess, what, how, and your voice levels for that. Lunch in the classroom, assemblies. What are your expectations? What will they do while they wait? What do you do about the bathroom and other kinds of problems? Classroom events and speakers. You need to have procedures in place for that as well. Field trips. You need to keep people safe. You need to have expectations. You need to have all kinds of things in place for field trips and train your students before that field trip happens. And what do you do about new students? Are you prepared for them? How are they going to enter your classroom and feel like they have everything that they need so that they can be integrated in the classroom as quickly as possible? So how are you going to handle new students? Whether it's a packet of papers for the families or links for them or ways that students are being accepted into the classroom by their students. You have all kinds of things that need to happen around a new student coming into your classroom. Whether it's day 5 of school or day 100 of school, students are going to need certain things in order to be successful in your classroom. Procedures around visitors. How are you going to greet them and welcome them into your classroom? What are the behavior expectations? What kinds of reasons might you have visitors in your classrooms for? Plan for those situations. And guest teacher or substitute teacher. You need to have behavior expectations and all kinds of systems in place for that as well. So there you have it. I'm sure there's things I've left out. And if you think of them, let me know. I'd be happy to add them in if they seem like they belong somewhere on that list. So what we're trying to do when we create all of these systems and procedures is that anything that we think students might struggle with on any given day, we practice it a few times over and over again. We're creating systems and procedures so that we're heading off trouble long before it happens. Practice makes these systems and procedures a habit. We want them to be autopilot, and that's a good thing. They should run in the background to support your class in their learning. Just like your backbone holds you upright, you don't think about it, it just does its job. If your students aren't following the procedures, it disrupts the class and the learning, and your systems and procedures are no longer supporting learning, but hindering it. That means it's time to practice and get stronger, just like you would with anything else. So what does training actually look like? Training your class can take up to 8 weeks. Usually it's less than that, but I cannot guarantee it, and neither can you. We have to be prepared for the longest time just in case. And then if it takes less, woohoo, that's wonderful. But if it doesn't, then we're not frustrated and disappointed. Explain the procedure or system, demonstrate or model it. Then you have your students model it, have them model it right, have some students model it wrong in a silly way, and have students model it right again. Practice in a way that makes sense. pencil sharpening might be tried out by various students over the whole school day versus lining up can be done as a whole class. So practice in a way that makes sense for that system or procedure. Research tells us that muscle memory and multisensory learning helps us remember things very well and for the long haul. So does surprise, strong feelings like silliness. And the physical act of trying out the systems is an important step. It's muscle memory. In addition to verbalizing them, we want to give students as many cues and as multisensory of an experience as possible so that these systems and procedures become a habit as quickly as possible. So here's an example of practicing how we come into the classroom in the morning. So students walk in, we go to their cubby, they put away their snack and water bottle on top of their cubbies, hang up their backpack, check their backpack for anything to turn in and turn it in, and then go to their seat and begin to work on their morning work until morning meeting. The voice level is the number 1 in my classroom, which is whisper to a table mate. We practice the voice level, then I demonstrate it, then a few students try it, then a few more do it wrong, a few more do it right, and then everyone every day does it until we get it right. Once your class is already into the classroom, you might get a few students to get their backpacks, go back to the door, pretend to walk in and put their things away properly using the right voice level, and do it that way so that you have small groups of students trying it over and over again until basically everyone gets an opportunity to try it. And then you can come in the next morning and say, okay, this one's for real, and they can give it a go that morning and every morning thereafter. At the end of the day, spend some time talking about how they're going to come into the classroom in the morning and remind them, and it's just repetition, repetition, repetition. The thing about systems and procedures is we do have to prioritize them. You don't have to do everything the first day of school or even the first week of school. And quite honestly, you shouldn't. It's too much information and it won't go well. Students don't need to know how to get their work when absent until later on. If someone is actually absent the first week of school, you'll just deal with that student individually. You can train the whole class in that procedure later on. It doesn't need to be a whole class training until much later on. It is not a top priority. I don't open the class library until the end of the first week or the beginning of the second week of school, so we don't even talk about it until then. I pre-select books for students to read the first few days or week of school and encourage them to bring some from home if they wish. Then, on Friday or the next Monday, we book shop and practice that throughout the day. But fire drill and other emergency procedures need to be covered in the first days of school. A good way to start and build up to it is start with training your students how to line up quickly and quietly and walk the hallways properly the first days of school, and continue to practice that and reinforce it all week. If you can get that down the first day or two, then when that fire drill happens on day 3, as a practice for the whole school, you'll be ready and your students will be ready because they already have some of the systems in place. They know how to line up quickly and quietly, and they are ready to go do a fire drill because they can handle it at that point. In addition, I withhold some of the students' school supplies and we slowly train how and when to use them over the course of the first couple of weeks of school. So my students don't have glue or scissors the first week of school. They don't have markers the first week of school. They have crayons, pencils, and erasers, and that's it. There's no reason for them to have all of those extra supplies right away until I actually have time to sit down and train them in using them. Now, if you're teaching kindergarten and you are really insistent that your students have glue and scissors the first week of school, then that will be a priority in training your students how to use them. Me, I don't do that. You're going to have to decide what is important to you and prioritize based on that. You might sharpen your students' pencils once a week at the end of the week for them the first couple of weeks of school, but then train them and when and how to do it themselves in later weeks of school. So you'll just need to decide which ones are priorities and which ones can wait a little bit, and then you can add them in later on so as to not overwhelm your students with all of the systems and procedures because there are so many of them. And you're better off training a few at a time and getting them really down than you are throwing everything at your students at once and expecting them to be successful at any of them. So as I add supplies to students' supply boxes, I train them how to handle them and leave them be when they aren't supposed to be using them. Then they can be added to their supply boxes or wherever you keep supplies. I keep students' personal supplies in 2 places. They have a pencil box in their desk with crayons, an eraser, and about 10 pencils. In their bin, in their cubby, they have markers, glue, scissors, and a small baggie with dry erase marker and eraser for their whiteboard. These are things that I keep separate, but accessible to them. If we're going to be using them, they can go and grab them at any time that they need them. But they aren't in their desk. I find for me, those kinds of supplies in their desk become a problem. And there are so many students who can't handle those kinds of materials, having them that accessible to them all day long. So you'll have to decide what works best for you. I know teachers who are very successful at having all their students' supplies in their supply box all day long, and they don't have an issue. I am just not successful with that. And so I know that for me and for my students, we need to separate them into 2 places. So decide what works best for you and your students, and that's the way you'll move forward. But don't forget, you can change your systems and procedures at any point in time too. These are not locked in, set in stone. You really can make adjustments. So don't be afraid to do that. It's okay. You don't have to put yourself in this position of now we have it and I've trained them and that's what we're doing. You can make adjustments and changes. Your students are very flexible and they'll roll with it. Just say, hey, you know what? This is not working. And so we're going to change this. Your students will go with it. They know it's not working. They'll agree with you and they'll make the change. So it's okay. Do the best you can and then make adjustments as the year and as your class demands. I have all kinds of other things for the beginning of the school year. I will link them in the show notes. Good luck this year. I am praying for you. Please know that. And I'm right there with you. My first graders and I are making the trek this year as well and loving every minute of it. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in, and for all those of you who've taken the time to post a review, email me your thoughts, or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in the episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.